I have always enjoyed football. I don't know what it is, because sports in my family really wasn't a part of things to much of any degree, but from my youngest years, I always enjoyed football. Football and basketball, but football was always my favorite, and that's what I played in junior high and played in high school as well. One of the things that we would do at our house, we had a pretty good sized front yard, and my dad was into things like fish fries and horseshoe tournaments and stuff like this. And so once in a while he'd host a fish fry, or frequently, in the summer months, there'd be horseshoe tournaments. He'd invite several of his buddies, their families, and all would come over, and they had picnic tables set up, and they'd be playing horseshoes over next to the garden, off to the side. And then it was real easy to have a pickup football game where just a whole bunch of my friends and stuff, we'd go over in the front yard to play. And, whenever you're doing a pickup football game in a yard, one of the hardest things is establishing where the boundaries are, right? And making sure everyone understands and agrees. These are the boundaries. This is out of bounds. This is, so on. But for us, it was real easy. Our front yard, the septic tank, the way it was positioned, and the lateral lines that came off of the septic tank is these two lateral lines. They ran parallel to one another, and it made perfect boundaries, sidelines, for where we're going to play football. And so during the dog days of the summer, when your grass is brown and all this, we had these two really green strips of grass, and that was the sideline. And, and no matter how dry it was, because we had a fairly sized family, there were 7 of us, and so, there was always water going into the septic tank and other stuff. And, and so it seemed like, even during the dry days of summer, that not only was there green grass, but there was moist soil, if you understand what I'm saying, right over the top of those lateral lines. I don't know if they were buried shallow or what the deal was, but the thing was, you really tried to avoid the sidelines at all costs. And if you stepped in, the sideline area, your shoe and sock would be all wet. And if you got tackled, which every now and then would happen, at least I had the benefit of that was my yard, so I could just go in the house and change. But these other guys, they had to stay that way the rest of the night. But I've always enjoyed football. And that's why this time of year is one of my favorite times of year. All these bowl games, college football, and, now officially, NFL football is over, for the year. And after tomorrow night, college football is over, so then it's basketball season. But there's something I want to share with you. Whether or not you are a fan of Chiefs football and you watch this or not, I want to share just a couple of observations about last Sunday's game. Don't even want to talk about yesterday's game. It's too raw still, okay? So let's talk about last Sunday's game. The Chiefs traveled out to San Diego, last regular season game. There was nothing at stake for the Chiefs. They had already secured a playoff spot. Winning or losing wouldn't change anything about the playoffs for them. San Diego, however, was playing for their life. They had to win to make the playoffs. If they lose, they would be out of the playoffs. So they had everything to lose. So you knew they were going to bring their A game. They were going to play the best football they possibly could to secure a playoff spot. The Chiefs, on the other hand, Coach Andy Reid made a decision in the week leading up to the game. He made a decision he was going to rest his starters. Does anyone remember, out of the 22 starters, because you can have 11 guys on the field at any one point in time, 11 offense, 11 defense. Does anyone remember how many of those 22 starters actually started that game? 2. That's right. There were 2. 20 of the 22 sat out. They were standing on the sidelines, wearing shirts and jerseys, but no pads. They weren't going to play. 20 of the 22 were guys that usually just spend all their time standing on the sideline. I mean, these were guys that they would see action in preseason games, and they would see action, obviously, in practices. But when it came to a real game, they just didn't see any action because they were guys that, well, the announcer of the game, he even referred to them as being the Kansas City Chiefs JV, junior varsity team that was out on the field. And so, whether you saw that or not, I mean, that's kind of what was playing out. These are guys that very seldom, if ever, made it into the game. Well, as I was watching the game, even though the Chiefs ended up getting beat barely in overtime in that game, I got to tell you that out of all the games during the season, it was probably the most inspiring game for me. Because these were guys that spend their time, they live on the sidelines. They don't see action. And now the whole game was put in their hands, and they were playing against a team that was hungry for a victory. And these guys actually should have won the game. Because one of our lone starters, first team players, our field goal kicker, went in second to the last play of the game, and he missed a field goal that normally he makes. He would have made that field goal, they would have won the game. That's with the junior varsity out on the field. And that's why I say I was inspired watching that game. And it was something that I just couldn't shake. I mean, I was thinking about it when I woke up Monday morning. I was thinking about it on Tuesday. I mean, you may think that's weird, but it was just something that I couldn't shake. And in regards to this message, when it came time to start hammering out what it was I was going to be sharing in the State of the Church address, again, this was in the forefront of my mind because it got me thinking about the church. I mean, these were guys, 20 of these 22 guys were guys that normally don't ever see any action except maybe once in a while on a special teams or something or other. But yet they were out on the field and they were making an impact. And like I said, it got me thinking about our church, especially in view of our topic today. 35 years ago, when I first started paying attention to stuff like this, the statistic that was being quoted all the time, I mean, every time you turned around, it seemed like you were reading this in a book or you were hearing it from a speaker. The statistic was this: as far as Protestant churches in America, it goes like this: 20% of the people in the average church do 80% of the work. Any of you ever heard that statistic before? Yeah, there's quite a few hands and heads nodding on that. And back 30, maybe it goes beyond 35 years ago. I just wasn't paying attention to anything church related, beyond 35 years ago. But I know 35 years ago, that was the statistic that was being thrown around, is that 20% of the people in the church do 80% of the work. Now, here in recent years, that statistic actually is changing a little bit, and not for the good. Nowadays, when that statistic is quoted, it is quoted more along these lines, that 15 to 20% in the average Protestant church, 15 to 20% of the people do 85% of the work in the average church. Now, obviously, that kind of a statistic isn't real encouraging, but that's what studies apparently are showing. Now, I don't know exactly where Crossroads stacks up in regards to statistics like that, because it's hard to measure. I mean, I can look and see how many people have signed up or are a part of a ministry team. We got 21 ministry teams in the church, and I can find out how many people signed up, and I can get a number, a head count from that. I can talk to Brad Fogo, who oversees our small group ministry, and I can ask him, how many small group leaders do you have? People that are taking the lead and doing the study and everything necessary to lead a group. So I can get some numbers from him for that. I mean, I can bring together some numbers, some things that are measurable, but there's a lot of things that aren't so measurable. For example, when we send out a prayer alert, when someone submits to the office, a prayer concern saying, please, could you pray for, this family member of mine or this job situation or what, we send those out to 108 email addresses. But how many of those 108 that are receiving that, how many of them seriously spend time in prayer over that request? See, that's what I'm saying. It's hard to measure. It's hard to really know. I mean, do they or don't they? Maybe some do and some don't, but what are those numbers? You know, it's hard to measure that. Or when it comes to inviting people to church, you know, getting active in your faith, kind of what the video was showing there, where you're actually witnessing to someone or trying to get a family member or a coworker or a neighbor, you know, to get serious about God, and so you're trying to share your faith with them. How many people in the church are actively doing that any given week or any given month? I mean, how do you measure that? So you see, there's a number of things that are hard to measure. But even with that thought in mind, though, I'm going to make this statement, and I stand behind this statement. Whatever the church here presently is, it is not what it could be. As a matter of fact, whatever the church here at Crossroads is right now, it is not what it should be. I think there's room to grow. Now, I don't know as the 20, 80%. I don't know if those numbers actually work, but regarding our church, but I'm fairly confident we've got some people standing on the sidelines and aren't actually getting into the game, getting into the action. But they could make an impact if they did. I want to challenge you this morning at the very beginning of today's message, and we're going to talk about a number of things this morning, but I want to challenge you right up front here to examine your own heart. It is not for me to examine your heart. That is for you to do. You examine your heart. You examine your life. I'll examine my heart, and I'll examine my life in regards to whether or not this, what we're talking about, this applies to you. Because the thing that you and I both need to understand is that you were not made to sit on the sidelines. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you are a Christian, if you're a part of His church, whether you're talking universal or local, you're a part of His church, you were not made to sit on the sidelines. Neither was I. It has been God's intent all along that you and I both get in the game, that we be participants, not observers, that we be in the middle of the action. Here's one of the verses that comes to my mind that communicates this, and it's certainly not the only verse. But 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 says it this way: each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. I really like that verse because it speaks to each one of us. It doesn't leave anyone out. I mean, this certainly applies to each and every one of us that considers ourselves to be a follower of Jesus, a Christian, a part of His church. It says each one of us should use whatever gift, whatever enabling, whatever talent, whatever it is that you've been equipped with. We should use that to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. God's grace appears in a variety of ways in people's lives. But you were never meant to be a sponge, just soaking it up and keeping it to yourself. You were meant to dispense it, to utilize it, to use it to the blessing and benefit of others. And that's what that passage clearly communicates. However you want to break it down, the message comes through loud and clear. You've got something to contribute to the life of the church. No one is left out. If you're a believer, you have got something to contribute. I am convinced, and I say this as surely as I'm standing up here today, I am convinced that this church has yet to see its best days. I don't think Crossroads has seen its best days. Now, don't misunderstand me. We've had some good days. There's no doubt about that. It's been fun to be a part of something that's making a difference in people's lives and making a difference in the community. But what I'm saying is we have not peaked. I don't think we've gotten even close to that yet. Now, having said all of that, let me say this. We've got some good things going on here in the church. And I want to talk about that just for a few minutes here in the middle of the message. We've got a few good things here, things to be encouraged about. Last Sunday, I had put on the connection card and we usually have some kind of a survey on there like there is today. But this was the survey question that was on last Sunday's connection card in the bulletin. It said, what is the one thing you like most about Crossroads? Now, Monday, these were compiled together. And I had the opportunity late Monday afternoon to see, the entire list of what people's responses were. And I've just got to tell you, I was encouraged by what I was reading. Things kind of seem to fall into certain categories. Probably the number one response that got more people referencing this had to do with how the church is Bible-based. In fact, one person worded it this way. In answer to that question, they said, Bible-based honesty. That was their way of referencing what they liked the most about the church. Others wrote things like commitment to Scripture, no sugarcoating of the Bible. And that probably, right in that arena, that particular subject matter, was probably where the number one response was. More people referred to that. But a close second had to do with what I'll refer to, although no one used this word, interestingly enough, I'll refer to as the word fellowship. People wrote down things like this. I have always felt welcomed when I walk in the doors at Crossroads. Someone else referred to it as being a family feeling in this church. Total acceptance. Several people, in answer to that question, just wrote these two words, the people. That was the thing they liked the most about the church, the people. A warm family atmosphere. That came up a few times as well. And then you had a few people that made reference to the worship. And just by putting those words in there, you're saying the worship in the church is what they like the most. They used words like how the worship is well planned. The worship is well prepared. So anyway, looking over this list, the listing of the responses that were given here, I've just got to say that I couldn't read over that without walking away from that encouraged. And so I wanted to share, some of that with you. But I also got to let you know that the list of things that bring encouragement to me go way beyond even what was referenced on these cards. I get encouraged when I walk down the hall when I'm making my way to the 7:45 service. Early in the morning, 7:45 service, I'm usually about 7:15 or 7:20. I'm starting to walk down the hall. I come walking by where the kitchen is, and we usually have 2 or 3 people working in the kitchen preparing the communion trays for everyone. And it's just fun to, once in a while, I'll stick my head in and say hi, but it's just fun to listen to them as they're talking, as they're laughing, as they're just sharing with one another. I walk into this room and we've got several guys spread out across the gym that are setting up the chairs that you are seated in right now. Sometimes they're not saying anything. They're just busy at work. Other times they'll be sharing and shouting across the room at one another a little bit. But there's that visiting that is going on there. One of the things that I enjoy being able to do on a Sunday, and I don't always get this opportunity, but it's to be able to stand off to the side of the entry area and just look into the entry area and watch the dynamics of people greeting one another as they walk in. And seeing the handshakes, seeing the pats on the back, seeing the hugs that are taking place. But probably even more than that, seeing the facial expressions. The smiles and the warm greetings that people are giving to one another. When you stop and you realize that the vast majority of us that make up this church, we did not know each other before we ever walked in the doors for the first time of Crossroads Christian Church. I mean, you may have known a handful of people that are here in the church, but by and large, you didn't know much of anybody in the church. But it was after coming, that's when you started building the relationships. And those are relationships that it's real obvious, just by way of observation on my part, it's real obvious that those relationships are meaningful relationships, as it should be. I mean, that is very much the core of what fellowship, body life, is all about. Sometimes when people are greeting one another, you'll see them laughing and joking. But every now and then you'll see someone pull someone else aside and they'll go into the living room off the entry area, or they'll just walk off to the side in the hallway or something. And you could tell they're talking about a serious topic, and they'll pray with one another. Now, I just got to say that does my heart good when I see that sort of thing. But even that is only the tip of the iceberg. One of the things that I have always, ever since I've been a pastor, I've always encouraged people to do is to get their nose in the book and to be people of the book, because we want to be a church built on the Word of God. And one of the things that has just thrilled me here at Crossroads is seeing that, especially here in recent years, the last several years, we've had over 100 people. A couple of the years I have had lists of close to 150 or so people saying, I am committing myself to read through the Bible in a year. And I don't know what that, says or communicates to you, but to me, that communicates volumes. Because that was one thing that always puzzled me back in the early days in the late 70s when I became a Christian to begin with, and whenever the subject would come up in a Bible study setting or something or other, and so you would ask the question, you just say, how many of you have read through the Bible? And how many hands didn't go up? And that always puzzled me. I mean, if we're people of the book and we consider the Bible to be God's inspired word and we haven't read all the way through it, how are we going to explain that when we stand before the Lord? Saying, oh yeah, I got your letter, I just never got around to reading it. I mean, something just doesn't ring right about that. But here in the church for several years in a row now, we've had, and this is just who has let me know, who has filled it out on a connection card or something or other, or if we had a sign-up sheet of some type, that we've had over 100 people. And I've had people that have told me when they signed up that they've been a Christian and going to church for 30 years, and they have never read the Bible all the way through, and they're committed to do that this year. And then at year's end, they come back to me and they say, you know what? I'm going to do it again this next year because it was a blessing. Another thing that I find very encouraging is to see some of the passion and desire to make an impact in areas even outside of the greater Kansas City area. We have local ministry outreach is what we refer to it as being LMO, that does things regarding the pregnancy center or city union mission and some of these food drives or clothing drives. And, we do those sprinkled throughout the year. And that's a good thing. And something we certainly need to continue to do. And seeing the kind of response that comes, during one of those kinds of drives and participation where people help serve meals, stuff like that, that's encouraging to see. This particular year, 2014, we've decided we're going to step it up even more as far as mission trips. Now, these involve more of a commitment of time and expense. We've got a couple of them that are stateside to help out with tornado relief in Joplin and in Moore, Oklahoma. We haven't got the exact days nailed down, I don't think, on the October one, somewhere mid-October. But a couple of those trips that are planned this year. And then we got 3 international mission trips that are planned: Mexico, Russia, Jordan, Haiti. And it's exciting because I'm part of the Haiti one, and I've already had 5 or 6 people saying, I want to be a part of that. And that's not even happening until October. But yet there's that desire to serve and to be a benefit and a blessing to people that live outside of our community, and to make a difference. Now, I will say one thing here just by way of emphasis because of the pertinence of the date. Russia, the mission trip to Russia, we've got leaders for all of these different mission trips, and the one to Russia, they need to know, if you are considering being a part of the Russia mission trip, January 15th is the deadline, because there's lots of preparation in advance to that as far as getting ducks lined in a row and all of this. And so if you're thinking about that and you got some questions and you're going to research that more, you may want to do it sooner rather than later, because January 15th is the date for that. But when I see that sort of thing, to me, that's encouraging. What about the subject of giving within the church? I got to say, I'm encouraged by the giving. Now, the leadership of this church, and those of you that have been through a closer look class, you're already familiar with this. We, the staff and the elders, we do not pour over people's giving habits. Outside of myself, I know what Colette and I give, but I have no clue what anyone else in here gives. And that was an intentional, deliberate decision that we made before the church ever got started, that just the treasurer would be someone that would be a part of that. But that was not going to be something we would be printing out reports, and in leadership meetings we'd be studying that sort of thing. So I really don't know specifics as far as individual giving, but I am able to see the numbers in regards to what giving is. And I got to say, that is encouraging to see what we have going on in this church. For example, this Wednesday night at prime time, we're going to be unveiling. Now, all the members have already seen this because of a mailing, but we're going to be unveiling for everybody the 2014 budget and talking about some of the details of the 2014 budget, especially as compared to the 2013 budget. Now, one thing I will point out, and I didn't double check this, but I remember this from the finance meetings about a month and a half ago, that the 2014 budget is basically 1.8% increased from 2013. So that's not a very big increase, is it? 1.8%. And there's some reasons for that, and that'll all be shared on Wednesday night. 1.8%. So a person could look at that and they could start saying, well, yeah, but it doesn't sound like we're growing much as far as giving is concerned. Whoa, hold your horses on that for a second. Remember what we did about 13 months ago? The Above and Beyond campaign? Remember that whole commitment, stepping out of the boat, giving above and beyond, not redirecting your present giving, but, continuing giving in the way that you're giving, and now above and beyond that to give more. Do you remember what was committed in that? A 3-year commitment totaling $1,377,520. Okay, over 36 months. That's what was committed above and beyond giving. Now, as of the last Sunday in December of 2013, what has been given to date is $412,098. Now, there's two ways you can look at this. One way you can look at this and you can say, okay, well, based on the number of Sundays in a 36-month time period, we are 37% of the way through the time frame. But the number, if you do the math, is more like 30%. So we're kind of falling a little bit behind, as far as what the total amount was that was committed. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at this is that this is above and beyond what giving had been in 2012 and what was given in 2013. And so when you start doing the math on that, you realize that over this last year, giving in this church increased 25 to 28% over what it was the year before. You stop and think about that for a moment. In the kind of economy and everything that we have, that we're dealing with. That's healthy. 25 to 28% increase in giving. Now, again, I don't know what that does for you, but I know what it does for me. It brings encouragement, to be able to see, because I know that giving has very much to do with where a person is at spiritually. I've read enough of the Bible to know that those two things are very much connected. You cannot divorce those two, though sometimes we're tempted to. You can't divorce them. Generosity is very much a part of spirituality. It's very much a part of maturity and growing in Christ. But you'll remember as well that the Above and Beyond campaign wasn't just about committing an amount of money that you're going to be given over 36 months above what you presently were given. That was part of it, but it wasn't all of it. Remember how we kept talking about stepping out of the boat? Like James and John, when Jesus came along and said, "Come, follow me." What did they do? They dropped their net. They stepped out of the boat. They stepped into the unknown. Into a whole area of life that that was something that they had never ventured there before. Or how about Peter when he was sitting in the boat and Jesus was walking on the water, and he bid Peter, he said, come to me. And what did Peter do? He stepped out of the boat and he walked out on the water. Yeah, eventually he started sinking, but he was walking on the water. And so that was part of the emphasis that we made, was going above and beyond, stepping out of the boat. If God was prompting you, if God was tapping you on the shoulder and saying, it's time for you to step out in faith in this area or this area of your life. And the challenge during the above and beyond emphasis was take him up on his challenge. Follow his prompting. Step out of the boat. And we've had a number of people and a number of stories that have been shared of people who took that to heart. I just want to briefly share with you one story that some of you, and part of the reason I'm sharing this is some of you already know about this because you've had kids that have gone upstairs to youth group, for some of the recent years, and so you know about this family and perhaps what happened over the last year with this family. Others of you do Facebook. I don't do Facebook, but a number of you do Facebook. And if you're friends of this family, then you're aware of what happened, but you may not have connected some of the dots in all of this. Carl and Missy Nurnberger, that have been a part of this church for years. In fact, they lived right behind Broken Arrow School, and that's where we were meeting before we built the building here. And they were just right behind the playground. And they just decided, as much as anything out of curiosity, that they would come and pay the church a visit. And little did they realize what that was going to set into motion. And it wasn't too long before they gave their lives to Christ. And even that was just the beginning. And the thing that has, as Carl's heart has been convicted and warming up more and more to being responsive to God's leading, the thing that ended up happening here just a few months ago is certainly a matter of stepping out of the boat. Carl and Missy, they quit their jobs. They put their house on the market. It wasn't totally in that order, but they put their house on the market and they sold their house. And they moved to a town south of Topeka, Burlington, Kansas. And Carl is now the youth pastor in the Burlington Christian Church over there. And it's an area that God has been prompting him for some time. And Carl and Missy bit the bullet. They stepped out of the boat as a step of faith in pursuing God's will in their life. And again, I don't know what that does for you. I know what it does for me, though. It's proof positive that God is working in people's lives in this fellowship. That's the sort of thing that you can't help but get pumped up about. See, this is what I'm talking about when I say that there are good things that are happening here in this church. This is the type of stuff on a personal level that keeps me going, seeing people being impacted by the Lord's church through the work of the Spirit. It's why we do what we do around here. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says this, "My dear friends, stand firm and steady. Keep busy always in your work for the Lord, since you know that nothing you do in the Lord's service is ever useless." Man, what a great verse. Anything you do in the Lord's name, any effort you put forth, any time you invest in His service is not useless. It is time well spent. And that's what that passage is saying. One of the things I liked what Paul said when he was writing his first letter to the church at Thessalonica. Paul was a traveling missionary during the first century, and so he never really spent a great deal of time in any one place. I think one particular church, he was there a couple years, but that was probably about as long as it ever got. And one of the places he went to was Thessalonica, and in getting that church going, and then he continued his travels and his missionary work. But he left a part of himself at Thessalonica. He left his heart there. And he was concerned about the church and how well the church was doing. And so he had a couple of guys check it out for him and report back to him as to how they were doing. And I just love these words Because you can see Paul speaking from his heart when he says this in his first letter to the church at Thessalonica. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 7 through 9, he says, "In all our distress and persecution," now let's just pause on that for a second. Paul did not always find himself with a receiving crowd when he would go into these different communities, into these different towns. There were times they were being run out of town. There were times that they were being persecuted. I mean, man, it wasn't smooth sailing. Sometimes it was rough going. Okay? And that's what he's talking about in that first phrase. In all of our distress and persecution, I mean, we're going through some tall weeds right now in our life, is kind of what Paul's saying. But even in the middle of that, we were encouraged about you because of your faith. For now we really live, since you're standing firm in the Lord. How can we thank God enough for you in return for all the joy we have in the presence of our God because of you? You see what Paul's saying there? Paul's saying, I invested myself. I did some work there in Thessalonica in getting you guys going and all. But in the meantime, now I've been traveling and doing this and that. And man, we're going through some real adversity. But I've heard some of the reports. And man, I'm really living now. There is joy in my life. Even in the middle of the adversity he was encountering, the persecution he was going through. He says, I'm really living now. Because I see that you're maturing. I see that you're growing. I see that you're serving. I see that the church is alive and well and making an impact, making a difference for Christ. What a cool passage that is. And I got to say that kind of in a similar fashion, every time that I find myself in a conversation, which sometimes happens around here on a Sunday morning, but just as often, if not more, it happens when I'm visiting with someone that I'm sitting down in the office and talking with, or in some other kind of a setting at a meal or something or other, and someone that I've known for a while, here I am talking to them, and all of a sudden I see it. I see it in their eye. I see the fire burning in their eye. I see that, based on where they were at 3 months ago or whatever, I see that somehow the switch is flipped. And now all of a sudden, they get it. And now they're on fire. And the passion, I mean, it's just boiling within them, the passion and the love for the Lord, because now they get it. And now they're driven in their service to God. And I got to tell you that when in conversing with someone, and I see that in their expression, I see that in their eyes, I hear that in their voice, that's when I'm really living. That's when I'm like, yes, this is what it's all about. This is what this church is all about, is reaching into people's lives and making an impact that goes beyond the here and now and that stretches into all of eternity. You remember the time that Jesus asked his disciples, he said, who do people say that I am? Remember that? It's in Matthew 16. Who do people say that I am? And the disciples responded by saying, well, some people say that you're Elijah, or you're Jeremiah, or even some say you're John the Baptist, who had been beheaded, not too much earlier. And then Jesus kind of made the question even more personal, and he said, who do you say that I am? Peter, remember Peter's? He's the one that spoke up first. He said, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And it doesn't say that Jesus started clapping, but I think he did. He either clapped or he patted him on the back. And he said, oh, Peter, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but my Father in heaven revealed that to you. And then Jesus made this statement, Matthew 16, verse 18. I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the forces of Hades will not overpower it. What's the rock? The rock is the testimony. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's who Jesus is. Jesus is saying, I'm going to build my church on that rock. There's three things that I want you to know about the church, and this goes for the church universal, but I believe with all my heart this goes for Crossroads Christian Church as well. specifically. 3 things I want you to know based on that passage. Number 1, Jesus is building his church. You need to get that, each of us, and I'm speaking to myself as much as I am anyone that's gathered in this room today, we need to get that through our heads. It is Jesus that is building his church. Sometimes we mistakenly think that we are the ones building the church. We think that, well, by doing this and by doing that, and we're building and we're hopefully increasing and there's more people and they're maturing and we're doing this and we're doing... That's not the way it works. We are not the ones that build the church. Jesus is the one that is building the church. We are tools in his hands, in the hands of the master carpenter. And we're different than one another. We have different kinds of abilities, but it's just like in your toolbox. You look in your toolbox. Not all the tools serve the same function, but all the tools in combination in the hands of the right person makes all the difference. But think of it this way, though. What good is a tool that doesn't make itself available? Now we're back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the message. What good is a tool that doesn't make itself available? That's just a spectator. But we need to understand it's Jesus that is building the church. And as I look over the church body, we are a diverse group. And we've got all kinds of backgrounds. We've got all kinds of personal stories. You know, there's just differences. There's differences of interest. I mean, I even heard it said there was Bronco fans that come to this church. I mean, that really shows how diverse we really are, okay? I mean, there's all kinds of diversity in the church, but you know what? The bond that ties us all together is Jesus. And like I said earlier, that you and I, originally, before we became a part of this church, we probably didn't know maybe a handful of people that are a part of this fellowship before. But now we know, and we care, and we love, and we fellowship, and we share in one another's lives. We're a part of a family. Yeah, Jesus is building his church. Second thing I want you to see in the passage is there will be challenges. I see that in the phrase that says the forces of Hades. Hades, the domain of the dead is what it literally means there. Some translations actually use the word hell. There will be challenges. If you don't like the word challenges, use the word problems, hindrances, obstacles. They all work. In fact, I'm going to say something that I don't know, may or may not be surprising, but I don't need a crystal ball to be able to look into 2014 in regards to certain things. Here we are at the very front end of 2014. And I just want you to know what I see as I look forward over the next 12 months. I see that we most likely have several problems that will surface in our path. We most likely will encounter some troubles within the church to some degree or another. And I know when you're talking about a state of the church address, that's really not what you're looking to hear. But yet that's what I see this passage teaching. And in fact, I base that not just on what I'm seeing in this passage, but I base that on 19 years of experience in this church. I mean, we'll be 19 come April. And as I look back over the almost 19 years since this church started, that there's a whole string of problems that if I really spent some time, I could make a list of what we've encountered, what we've had to deal with to one degree or another. So based on the past 19 years, but even beyond this verse and beyond what we've encountered and had to deal with and work through over the last 19 years, even looking into the book, the very first church, we have the history of the very first church in the Bible. You know what book of the Bible it's found in? The summary of it, the history of the first church? It's the book of Acts. And we can learn some things about the very first church that was led by the apostles of all people. You would think if there was ever a church that was problem-free, it would be the guys that were mentored by Jesus, who were discipled by Jesus. That would have been a church that, man, it was smooth sailing for that church. But yet, when you open up to the book of Acts and you start reading through, you see something quite to the contrary. You read in Acts chapter 5 about they had to struggle with hypocrisy within the church. Remember Ananias and Sapphira? In Acts chapter 6, a certain segment of the church, of some needy people, their needs were being overlooked. But for whatever reason, there were some other needy people and their needs weren't being overlooked. I mean, that kind of presents a problem, I would say. What did the church do? They had to basically restructure how they were doing some things to address that. But it was a problem. But it was a problem that ended up being addressed. You turn to Acts chapter 15 and you read about false teaching surfacing in the church. Boy, they had to nip that in the bud right away. You also read, by the time you're at the tail end of Acts chapter 15, and you read about some sharp disagreements between some of the key players in the church. They weren't seeing eye to eye. Yet there were problems in the first church. The thing is, Satan will use any means he can to undermine the plans of God. And if that was true then, it'll still be true today. And the only way that Satan will leave us alone as a church is if he doesn't consider us a threat. And that would be very sad if that were the case, because then we would have much deeper problems that exist within the church. What are some of the potential challenges? What are potential problems, obstacles, hurdles that we could possibly face? Well, obviously persecution. Satan, the full frontal assault, he does that. In some parts of the world today, we have more severe persecution going on than pretty much any time in history. But we don't so much see that here. So Satan is working in more subtle ways. One of the threats that I see, and I think has kind of surfaced its head every now and then over the last 19 years, and it's something we need to be aware of, and I, for lack of a better way of referring to it, I'll just refer to it like this: social contentedness. That is a threat. What I'm meaning by that is there is a dynamic that happens with people. A dynamic that people that study this sort of thing say that the average person builds a network of people they consider to be close friends, not intimate friends, but close friends that they know by first name and, they know details about their life and all this, of about 60 people. Now, that varies. The range is probably 60 to 80, somewhere in that area. But that's the typical thing if things just happen in a natural way in any kind of an organization. I'm not limiting it to a church. In any kind of an organization, that's kind of the way it develops, is that you've got a sphere of friendship and fellowship with about 60 to 80 people. And it doesn't go beyond that, because by then your needs are met, because that's all you really need. Oh, you might have some acquaintances that push that number higher, but that's not the same thing. At the same time, regarding studies on churches here in the U.S., it is clearly, and this is an understatement because the percentages are higher, and I just don't remember them off the top of my head right now. Over 80% of churches in the U.S. have attendances of less than 100 people. And I think it's actually less than 75 people. Now, I know some of that could be because of small towns. You don't have a population base to draw from. But unfortunately, it includes cities as well, settings like this, where there certainly is a population base. But you see, part of what the dynamic is that happens is that, and this happens so many times with brand new churches too, a new church gets started and they start growing, and then right around the time they hit 75, 80, 100, 120, somewhere in that time, all of a sudden people's social needs are being met. And so now they're not reaching out, they're not connecting with strangers near as much as before. This is a danger, an ever-present danger, within the church. You and I, we need to be tuned into. Let me show you a verse that I've shown. It's been quite a while ago that I showed this before, but for what it's worth, I want you to hear this. Romans chapter 12, verse 13 says, "Always be eager to practice hospitality." Now let me tell you what the word hospitality literally means. The literal meaning of the word hospitality is the love of strangers. That's what Paul was saying. We should be eager to practice the love of strangers. I mean, you may have your social network in place, and you might feel comfortable with that. But basically what Paul is saying is that you see someone that you don't know, take some initiative and get to know them. Make contact with them. Express to them the warmth that someone back when expressed to you when you first stepped in the doors into the fellowship. Another possible danger, and then I'll move on, but another possible danger we need to be aware of is the possibility of discord. Discord. For a long time now, one of Satan's number one tactics has been that of divide and conquer. It's been a strategy that he has used to paralyze many, many churches. And over the 19 and a half years that I've lived here in Shawnee, I have lost track of the number of churches just on the Kansas side of Kansas City that have had splits because of dissension, division, discord. And that is a weapon that Satan continues to use to this very day. And we have got to be careful. We have got to be on our toes, because sometimes the devil can be pulling strings that we don't even realize, in stirring up something within our heart. I'll just show you this verse. It's a part of an entire chapter that contains Jesus' prayer. The longest prayer of Jesus recorded in the Bible is in John chapter 17. And the number one thing he prayed about more than anything else in that prayer was unity. And you see it reflected in that verse. But all the surrounding verses are talking about it too. He was talking about future believers there, and this was his number one prayer, that they would be unified, not divided. Yeah, there's going to be challenges. I just named a couple, but there could be several others that could be added. Number 3, what I see in this verse, the church will prevail. And that's the best news of all. The church will prevail. And you read that when you're reading in the Bible. When it all shakes out, in the very end, the church is still standing, whereas the devil isn't. But you see, the key is that we stay the course, that we stay focused. Because dotted across the landscape are many, many churches that lost their focus. Might you and I never allow that to happen to Crossroads? Might you and I both do what we need to do to ensure that we never slip into a mode of becoming spectators in the church, just watching the action from the comfort of the sidelines. We can't afford to do that. There's too much at stake. There's too much opportunity that will be lost if we take that approach. You were not made to sit on the sidelines. You and I both need to be in the action, reaching and teaching, bringing them in, building them up. As our purpose statement has said, since the day we started as a church, we exist to bring people to Jesus Christ and to assist them in becoming His fully devoted, reproducing followers. That is the heartbeat of the church. That is our mission. And we need to remain focused on that. Everything else is secondary. That is why we are here. That's why the church is here. To reach, to bring in, to build up, so they can join us in reaching and bringing in and building up, and so they can join us in reaching and bringing in and building up. That is the calling that we have. This is who we are, and this is what we do. 2014 is a year loaded with potential. This is no time to coast. This is no time to hide behind excuses. And this is no time to mechanically just go through the motions of doing what we did last year. It is my prayer that He will find us both eager and available to advance His cause through this church. That's my prayer. And I hope it's your prayer as well. Our ushers will be getting up and preparing for communion while you and I, at this time, prepare our hearts. Would you pray with me, please? Father, thank you. Thank you for calling us into your family, allowing us to be a part of this body of believers. And Lord, we are grateful for almost 19 years now that this church has been here, and that this church has had the opportunity to make a difference in people's lives, to make an impact that has a rippling effect into all of eternity, beyond what we can even see. But Lord, we still know the best days are yet ahead. And I pray, Lord, that each and every one of us in here, in due diligence, would make ourselves available to be used by you in the ongoing quest of building your family. Father, forgive us when we lose sight of that and we become self-absorbed in thinking of only our own interests. But help us to keep in the forefront of our hearts and our minds what your will is, what brings you glory, what brings people to you. Father, I pray that we will pursue your will like never before as you build your church. Thank you for Jesus and the sacrifice that he made on our behalf. And Lord, I think I speak on behalf of many that are in this room when I say the least we can do is to make ourselves available to serve you with our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole strength. We pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus.